This is a cool little thing that I wanted to make a video about, and unfortunately I ended up waiting like 5 days to talk about it, mostly because I wanted to make this video on a day where both of these teams were inactive, so we could get the full capacity of the fanbase focused on what we have to talk about. 3 years ago, on January 28, 2019, we saw ourselves a trade made between the Toronto Maple Leafs as well as the LA Kings, and this trade, 3 years down the line, is honestly serving as a pretty big win-win, and as a result I wanted to talk about it here in today's video, mostly because, as we said, it is the anniversary, or it was the anniversary, the birth date of this trade. Even though we are a little bit ahead, it's kind of a belated thing at the moment. So, without further ado, let's go back over to 2019 and talk about the Jake Muzzin trade. This is how things went down all the way back then. The Toronto Maple Leafs acquired Jake Muzzin, a defenseman from the LA Kings, who was doing pretty well and who was seen as more of a prime in-the-now kind of option. Muzzin right now is 32, so back when the trade was made, he was 28. 6'3", 227, he's making $5.625 million till the end of the 2024 season. When he was traded to Toronto back in 2019, he was actually on a $4 million AAV deal, which would have expired the next season, so the Maple Leafs went out there and they signed him to an extension. Muzzin, right now for Toronto, is one of the more capable defenders who honestly debatably isn't playing his best right now. You could definitely make the argument that he is playing injured, but Jake Muzzin is, at his best, one of the more all-round capable and just well-rounded defensemen on the Maple Leafs. He makes Justin Holl look like a much better defender than he really is when Muzzin is playing at his best. And for the most part, Muzzin has been very solid. 23 points in 53 games played for the Maple Leafs in his first season. 53 games played, 27 points last year, 11 points in 35 games this season, so he's been a pretty consistent guy when it comes to point production, while also having that physical edge and defensive responsibility to his game. The Maple Leafs, in turn, gave up a few things. First off, you have yourselves Carl Grundstrom, a prospect in the system that was playing mostly for the Marlies and who was doing pretty well. You had yourselves also Sean Durzi, a recent draft pick, overage player pickup from the 2018 NHL Entry Draft, who was doing pretty well at the time, but who was doing well enough to be considered as a trade piece for this entire transaction. And you also had yourselves the 2019 Toronto Maple Leafs first-round pick, that in which we will get to soon. Before we go over any of this, though, I just wanted to say how much of a win this was, mostly because the Maple Leafs traded all future, they traded away Grundstrom, they traded away Durzi, they traded away the pick, in exchange for a Muzzin who is doing really well and who is still doing pretty well, too. He has definitely been one of the more integral parts to the Toronto Maple Leafs blue line, and I don't really think that reputation is going to change throughout the course of his 2024 expiring contract. He's still got 2 more seasons after this year. Muzzin, as long as he can still just do what he's able to do, and as long as he's able to play not injured, he'll be a pretty good defender for years to come. And the Maple Leafs got him smack dab in the middle of his prime. He was 29 years old, and now if you go over what the LA Kings have, I mean, it kind of works out in the best way possible. When the 2019 trade was made, the LA Kings were not really in playoff contender mode anymore. They were already fading out of being a solidified playoff powerhouse like they were for a good part of the early 2010s. And guys like Muzzin, guys like Toffoli, they were kind of in that ballpark of not really being all too useful anymore. Sure, they were good players, but the LA Kings just didn't need good players. So what they did in that 2019 period was they traded them all away. Tyler Toffoli got sent to Vancouver for Tyler Madden, Tim Schaller, and a draft pick. You had yourselves this Jake Muzzin trade, which saw Muzzin get sent over to Toronto. We're going to have to make a video about that Tyler Toffoli trade, by the way, 3 years later. Oh boy, that's going to be fun. But either way, the LA Kings acquired themselves a pretty good package here. Carl Grundstrom, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty solid player. He's playing on the Kings right now, he's 24 years old, making $725,000. He's got 9 points in 29 games played, but that is a pretty significant improvement when compared to the 11 points he had in 47 games last year. He was developing a lot in the AHL. He spent a good chunk of time in the Ontario Reign and Toronto Marlies systems, where he was a pretty solidified point producer. But this year, finally, no more distractions, no SHL time, no AHL time. It's just been Grundstrom in the NHL, and to be fair, He's not really the best player out there. Like, there are definitely other players within the LA Kings organization that are younger and are somewhat better in different ways than one, that it makes it difficult to try to project where 24-year-old Carl Grundstrom is really going to take his career going forward, whether or not he's included in another trade or whether or not he just sticks around in a bottom six, middle six caliber role. It remains to be seen, but at the very least, there is a serviceable NHL player included in this trade. Then you talk about Sean Durzi. Man, you want to go over a guy who has really started to go out there and mold himself into an NHL talent. He's a right-handed defenseman, 6 feet, 185, 23 years old. As we noted, an overage draft pick from the 2018 draft by Toronto. Back in 2018 when he was selected, he was a very good producer for the Owen Sound attack on their blue line. Getting sent over to the Guelph Storm, he helped them out in the playoffs, did a very good amount of damage over there. But then, once the trade was made, there were a lot of Maple Leafs fans that were kind of frustrated that they did give up on Durzi. Sure, getting Muzzin in return has paid off tremendously, but there was a prospect in Durzi that a lot of people were super excited for, and he showed off why right away in the AHL as an immediate Ontario Reign point-producing machine. This season with the Ontario Reign, though, he was over a point per game as a defenseman. Getting called up to the LA Kings, he's played 29 games, has 13 points, and he's really started to look like a very solid puck-moving option on that blue line, and a guy that definitely is making himself known as one of the more underrated Leafs picks, especially as an overager. So, a lot of Leafs fans are going out there saying, yeah, if there was anybody that I kind of hate missing out on in that Muzzin trade, it is Sean Durzi. But at the end of the day, Muzzin and the impact he does have is still pretty important, so there you go. Win-win sort of scenario over here. And then you go over the first-round pick that the Maple Leafs gave up as well. This pick ended up being 22nd overall in the 2019 NHL Entry Draft, and the LA Kings used that pick to select Tobias Bjornfot, a 20-year-old defenseman who suited up in the NHL right away. Now, to be fair, he only played 3 games in his rookie season as an 18-year-old, but he spent the majority of that season in the AHL too. He's been a pretty solid guy as well. He's played 47 games for the Kings this year, 6 points, and you might look at that and say, okay, what the hell, this guy's a bum, only 6 points in 47 games played? And I'm gonna have to stop you right there, because Tobias Bjornfot is mostly known for his two-way defensive abilities. He was never really known for his offensive potential, nor his offensive prowess, and just the fact that he even is 20 years old, playing in the NHL as a solidified defender on this blue line already, is a good sign. Like, Swedish defensemen usually grow up into pretty alright defensemen, especially if they make their debuts and stick around as early as Bjornfot is. And hey, if you want to go out there and say that you want more offense out of this trade return, just look no further than Sean Durzi. The Maple Leafs ended up giving up 2 quality assets that are likely going to be long-term, stable pieces on this LA blue line for years to come. Durzi and Bjornfot, right side and left, could honestly be a pretty good long-term pairing, and you gave up Muzzin for this, plus Grundstrom, whom you could probably get some value as well, either in a trade or just on your team in general. So, when it comes to the Maple Leafs, they ended up getting a defenseman that helped them out tremendously in Jake Muzzin. He's still helping them out today, and even though he might not be at the best of his gameplay right now, there still is a whole bunch more to accomplish with this guy in the next 2 years on his contract. Meanwhile, the LA Kings had themselves a boatload of prospects that became something at the NHL level, and a draft pick that has become something as well, as a 20-year-old too. So, there's a whole bunch of potential going into the long term for what the Maple Leafs gave up in this trade, which is why I'm saying it's a win-win. The LA Kings are becoming a lot better now, and it's because of moves like this. It's because of the young guys they have drafted and developed. It's because of the youth flourishing throughout this lineup, complementing the guys like Edler and Quick and Kopitar, some older players on this team, very well. Not to mention the fact that Doughty is still doing Doughty things. He's doing very well, and it's almost like the entire hole left by Toffoli and Muzzin and all those guys, it's sort of been replaced by a lot of these other younger guys who have come into the Kings system and actually shown off very well. Victor Arvidsson is doing extraordinarily well. Iafallo has kind of formed into his own. Philip Deneau is over here, and Adrian Kempe and Trevor Moore. There are some very good performances on here, and you gotta go out there and say, yeah, like, the timeline was a little bit different 3 years ago. You were kind of in a mini sort of rebuild, retool on the fly kind of mode, and you capitalized tenfold. So, Kings fans, talk to me in the comments. What do you think about the Muzzin trade, and what are your opinions on what you have received in that deal? Leafs fans, tell me in the comments as well, how do you perceive losing out on Durzi, Grundstrom, and Bjornfot? I think this is a win-win trade. Let me know in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Trolls 99, and bye.